I will tell you, Director Deutsch, as a former Los Angeles police narcotics detective, that the agency has dealt drugs throughout this country for a long time.
Been funneling drugs into the inner cities and to the African American community in particular as part of a covert effort to stop them attaining stability, building wealth, and achieving political power.
It is aimed at African American, there's no doubt about that whatsoever. And for the other non-African people, they should know that this directly will harm them too.
These ideas took particularly by socialist revolutionaries called the Sandinistas. In response, right-wing groups known as the Contras began a brutal paramilitary campaign, receiving money and weapons from the CIA as part of the Cold War struggle against the Soviet Union.
If we cut off the freedom fighters, we will be giving the Soviets a free hand in Central America, handing them one of their greatest foreign policy victories since World War II.
But
got a hold of a CIA report revealing that they were working in the mid-1980s with Contras fighting the Sandinista government. They were warned by their editors that this was not something that was going to make the people that own their newspapers very happy, and most of them ended up losing their jobs.
At this point, the CIA strongly denied that they were involved in the drug trade. But on the streets, the rumors began to spread that the government was either actively or passively allowing crack to be sold. LA's crack scene, and probably America's first ever crack millionaire.
What's the most money you ever made in a day?
$3 million.
What Webb uncovered was that Ross's main cocaine supplier was a guy named Danilo Blandon, a Nicaraguan exile who funneled tens of thousands of dollars in cocaine profits back to the Contras through banks in Miami. Blandon
the government's bureaucracy. Thus far, the committee has heard testimony from ATF agents who reported that they were ordered to let guns destined for Mexican drug cartels to walk away from the hands of known criminals. Today, this committee will have the opportunity to question supervisors of these agents who knew about and believed these tactics were appropriate. The committee will also hear from ATF agents who worked in Mexico and who were horrified to learn ultimately about this program. The task before the committee is very serious. The acting director of ATF, in a transcribed interview with investigators, has said that the Justice Department is trying to push all of us away from its political appointees. Indeed, the Justice Department continues to withhold key information and has inappropriately interfered with this investigation. Let me be clear, the Justice Department is not our partner in this effort. They are the subject of this investigation, and their continued interference will not be allowed to derail the committee's work. Last month, members of this committee traveled to Mexico on a fact-finding mission, where we were briefed on how the U.S. and Mexican law enforcement agents are working together to fight the drug lords who are responsible for more than 34,000 deaths in the last 4.5 years.
Found reach, and it continues to affect people of color in many aspects of their lives, especially their health, as you'll see in this video. After the Great Depression in the 1930s, redlining has a long, profound reach, and it continues to affect people of color in many aspects of their lives, especially their health, as you'll see in this video. After the Great Depression in the 1930s, President FDR wanted to bring economic relief to Americans. But let's preface this with the fact that it was the 1930s, so his concern was really for white Americans. The federal government started a series of programs called the New Deal. Besides increasing the housing stock, the New Deal purposefully segregated white Americans from black Americans, immigrants, and Latinos. The New Deal offered incentives for whites to move out of inner-city neighborhoods to the suburbs, a phenomenon known as white flight, by providing mortgage programs with targeted eligibility. The New Deal introduced legislation called the National Housing Act of 1934 to make housing and mortgages more accessible and affordable for white Americans. To further perpetuate segregation, the Homeowners Loan Corporation introduced a system of mapping of neighborhoods in cities across America called redlining. The HOLC graded and color-coded neighborhoods into 4 categories based on racial qualifications. Neighborhoods graded as A or best, B was still desirable, C was definitely declining, and D was hazardous. The government
he or she is involved in or has committed a crime. It does not require probable cause. The stop may be followed by a frisk, a limited pat-down of the outer clothing. If the officer has reasonable suspicion, the person is armed and dangerous. The controversial practice has existed for decades in police departments across the U.S. But what is considered reasonable suspicion? It's a legal standard that an officer must meet in order to briefly detain and search a person. It's more than a hunch. An officer must be able to point to specific facts or circumstances in order to justify the stop and frisk. For example, a suspect who fits the description of a criminal runs after seeing police or drops a suspicious object after seeing police. If an officer doesn't have reasonable suspicion, the stop and frisk is considered unreasonable and violates the Fourth Amendment.
Government-sponsored institution. This is in part why President Biden issued an executive order back in January, intended to right the historical wrongs Black folks have faced when it comes to housing and home ownership in this country. But first, let's take it back.
The dawn of the 20th century, African Americans in major cities lived scattered throughout the city. They weren't segregated particularly. It's only with the Great Migration of 6 to 7 million African Americans north and west escaping the South, the predominant response of the United States government and state and local governments to the Great Migration was to contain Black people in
productive and lazy and beaten down, then you must be an ancient Israelite, because look at these curses. I want the curses to apply now to the Hebrew Israelite. Well, no, he does, because he wants to show how if you're unproductive and lazy, and beaten down, then you must be an ancient Israelite, because look at these curses.